In the last video, I made this wooden buck for the Curvy Seat. This time we'll start the process of patterning the metal panels to fit the buck. So first we need a strategy. It would be very difficult to make this seat all from one piece of metal, so I'm going to break it up into multiple pieces. The first division is going to be between the top of the seat and the bottom of the seat. So there'll be a welded seam of all the panels right across this station. And then I plan to have another welded seam that follows these long side stations. So that gives us 6 pieces. So I'm going to make paper patterns for each of these areas. Let's start with the bottom left side. I'm going to use lightweight paper to make the patterns, and I'll hold the paper to the buck with push pins. But I need a strategy about where to position the pins, and that strategy is based on how I'll do the shaping. So if I had the ability to shrink deeply into the panel, I might do it one way, but I'm going to do this with simpler tools that can only shrink in about 1 inch from the edge. So the majority of the work will be done by stretching. So in this case, I'm going to stretch the metal between my thumbs and shrink the metal outside of these areas. So I'll place the push pin just about in the center of the area where the stretching will happen. So let's start with this middle station. I'll put a push pin right here. And I'll use a similar strategy for the next station. So I'm going to put the push pin in the center of the area that gets stretched. And the same thing on this lower station. The area that gets stretched is here, so I'll put the push pin right in the center. Now we'll fold the paper down and find the edge of the long stations. I'll make a series of dashed lines here. I'm pulling the paper taut for each of these dashed lines. And I'll mark the end of the station on both sides. Then we'll work on the lower part. Okay, I'll put this flat on the table for the next step. Now we'll use some masking tape to connect the dots and get a smooth curve. I want to allow myself a little extra material all around the perimeter of this, so I'll use another line of tape to show the outside of the cut. So I'm giving myself about 3/4 of an inch on all sides. And now I can cut the pattern out. So here's the pattern for the lower side. And because our buck is symmetrical, this will work for both the left and right sides. I'll use the same strategy for this pattern, so I'll put the push pin in the center of the area that needs to be stretched. Then with the felt tip marker, I'll mark the edges of the stations. And again, I'll lay this on the table and use tape to connect the dots and lay out a border about 3/4 of an inch wide. So here's the pattern for the upper side piece. Now I'll make the pattern for the lower center piece. And I'll find the edges. I'm ready to cut this one out now. Just like before, I'll add a border on all sides. I can use wider tape on this one because it doesn't have to curve very much. So this one's ready to cut out. And the center top pattern will be the last. Okay, I'll pull this off, add a border, and cut it out. I'm ready to cut out the first part. The material I'm using is 3003 H14 aluminum, 62 thousandths thickness. So I'll lay this out right on the edge. This is so close to being straight, I'll use the straight edge of the material. I'll get as close to this edge as I can. Use a couple of spring clamps to hold my pattern in place. And I'll push this down so it's flat against the metal and draw a line right on the edge of the pattern. This will be our trim line. So we're ready to cut. I'll be using a cordless electric shear for this. If you don't have a tool like this, you can do this with a jigsaw. So here's our first part ready to be shaped. When I buy my aluminum, I pay extra to have a PVC film put on one surface to protect it from scratching, but we need to pull that off now. And cutting metal leaves a raw edge that can easily cut your hands, so I like to deburr all my parts after cutting. So the part's completely deburred and we can start the shaping now. I'm going to soften this with heat. That process is called annealing, so that's what we'll do next. To anneal this alloy of aluminum, it has to be heated to about 800 degrees Fahrenheit, and I'll do that with an oxyacetylene torch, and I'm using a multi-orifice or a rosebud tip for this. So I'm going to dust a coating of soot on this from a pure acetylene flame, and then heat the metal until that soot burns off, and that's just about 800 degrees. And you'll notice I'm using a spacer under the material. The only reason for that is if I put the material on the table and dust it with acetylene, the soot gets stuck to the table and it's difficult to remove. So by raising it up a short distance, it solves that problem. So we'll use a pure acetylene flame and just put a light coating of soot on the metal. Like I say, it's just a light coating. Then I'll use a neutral flame to burn that soot off. So this piece of material is fully annealed now. We've taken it from the half-hard condition I purchased it in all the way down to dead soft. And I'm just going to let this cool naturally. This is a non-heat treatable alloy, so I could quench this in water if I wanted to without harming the properties. But many alloys of aluminum are heat treatable, so you wouldn't want to quench those. The first step in the shaping is I want to pull this edge down to about a 30-degree angle, and the easiest way to do that is with a shrinker. So this is a foot-operated shrinker. You can buy bench-mounted shrinkers that are exactly the same, that are quite a bit less money, and they would work equally well. So I'm just using gentle pressure on the foot pedal. I'll check this against the buck, and it's certainly coming along. I have quite a bit more to go. So I'll go back to the shrinker, and the more I shrink that edge, the more it will be pulled down. I'll try it again. It's coming along. Seems like this corner needs to go down quite a bit, so I'll do a lot more shrinking there. I'll try that against the buck, and that's looking a lot better. Maybe I'll shrink it a couple more times right here. So that's starting to match the all-over contour pretty well from front to back. And I'll do a little shrinking on this edge now. I'll try this into place. It's looking pretty good. I think I'll go just a little bit more on this edge. And I'll try it against the buck one more time. Give this a little twist. And it's coming along nicely. So I've only worked a short distance on the outer edge using the shrinker. And let me show you where we're going with this. So with the shrinker, I've dropped the edge down. And then I'm going to bulge the center up by stretching. And I'll use the English wheel for that. So we have to go, I'd say about 5/8 of an inch in this area. That's where it needs the most stretching. So I will go to the English wheel. And I put a 3 1/4 inch radius wheel on the bottom. That's the best all-over match for this part. And I'll start raising the center of this panel. Give it a little more pressure. I'm working a small area because that's where it needs to stretch the most. I'm wheeling from some different angles. That helps the part shape more smoothly. So let's try this against the buck and see how we're doing. So far, so good. No problem so far, but it does need quite a bit more doming. Looking at the top side, I'd say it probably needs to dome another 3/8 of an inch, approximately. And the English wheel is what does that. So we'll go back to the wheel. I'm going to give it just a little bit more pressure to speed the stretching. And I'll start working toward the front of this panel as well. So in just a couple minutes' time, we've already put a lot of shape in this. Let's see how the shape matches the buck. It's coming along. I'm going to twist this with my hands a little bit. So it needs more shape everywhere. I'm just looking at it to gauge where I'll work it next. I'm going to dome this area more. I'll use a different angle on this. I find the more often I cross the angles of my tracking, the smoother the part gets. It helps to work out any non-uniform areas. Try that on the buck. Certainly is getting better. Straighten out the edges a little bit. I'm going to pull this buck off the edge of the table a little bit so this corner has a place to drop off. It's looking better, and it needs a little bend up here. It's looking better every time. I can see it's rocking on this station, so I'll do some doming right in this area. I'll wheel that in a different direction. So let's try this on the buck again. It is getting better. Still has a little bit of a rock. I think I'll dome it in this area next. See how that's shaping up. Considerably better. So it needs to dome up right here. Okay, the fit at the front station isn't bad, or at this station. I guess that's the center station. And then moving toward the front actually needs a lot of curvature right in here. Might be able to do some of that by bending, pressing with my belly down against the table to help bend the part. And that did a lot. So it's not rocking on this station like it once was. And this corner needs to go down a lot. It needs to go down a couple of inches. And I'll start doing that by bending it. And it's coming along pretty well. So this corner needs to go down a lot. So I'll do that by wheeling. I'm actually twisting the panel this way as I'm pushing it into the wheel. That's what's going to help make that corner go down. It's kind of like the twist that an airplane propeller has. Let's try that again. And that certainly helped a lot. So it's about 1/4 of an inch off now. And actually, I think where it's rocking is right on this station right here. So if I give it a little bit more room here, if I bulge this up, that will allow the corners to drop down. So here's the section we'll go after next. I'll wheel that from a couple of different directions. Try it again. That was a tremendous help. It's not rocking the way it was at all before. So it's certainly not a perfect fit, but I think it's time to start fine-tuning the shape to just smooth out the curvature I have and to get it to fit a little bit tighter against the buck. So far, so good. I've spent some more time tweaking and adjusting this, and it's starting to fit pretty well. If I find that one place where it really snuggles into place, I've got a nice fit on all of these stations with one exception. This front corner has a little gap under it. You can see when I press that down it rocks. So this needs to pull down about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to shrink this edge down, and then I'll go about smoothing this whole panel. I'll use the shrinker to pull that edge down. A little bit tricky to get a panel with this much curvature into the shrinker, so I start where I can, and the shrinker jaws will actually flatten out the metal a little bit with each bite, but I can still pull that edge down by slowly working it in. Just taking small bites, and let's see if that has pulled that down. I think it has. It's not very smooth here. I put a lower crown wheel in this machine, and I'll use that to smooth not only this corner, but all of the panel. So let's work on the corner first. I'm going to check that on the buck to see if I have the fit I want. I'm going to tweak this by hand a little bit, but I think I'm getting really quite close. Yeah, that did pull that corner down, so I'm very happy with this corner. So I'll wheel over the whole panel now just to smooth it out. You can see there are some visible ridges in it, and I can get rid of those. I'm spacing my tracks very close together now. They're about 1/4 of an inch apart. And that should do a very nice job of smoothing this panel. So I've smoothed it out toward the middle of the seat, and I'll continue the smoothing now toward the front edge. So you can see how much smoother the panel is now that I've used that lower crown wheel. And let's check the fit one more time. That's actually fitting very nice. So I'm happy with this panel at this point, and we'll move on to the next one. I'll shape the upper side piece next, and I'll be using the full-size English wheel for this. The full-size machine has some advantages. Because the frame is stronger, it can exert more pressure on the wheels, and it shapes faster. Also, because of the additional pressure, it can utilize wheels that have flat spots in the center. And this makes the shaping go more quickly, And it's also easier to get panels smooth because the wide track allows you to cover a large area completely with fewer passes than a true radius wheel. So this panel is interesting because the curvature of all of these stations is 6 inches. I've tested that with my template here, and they're all just about identical. So that'll make the shaping a little bit more straightforward. And there's one more feature that the top of this has that the bottom didn't, and that's this area here. This is what's called the reverse curve. So it's convex from right to left, but it's concave from top to bottom. Here's an extreme example of a reverse curve, and these shapes are a little bit challenging to make. So I'll talk my way through the process of making a reverse curve in this area. But the first thing I want to do is to put that 6-inch radius curve in the whole panel. And I'm going to do that in a special way. I put a rubber band over the top wheel, and I put a 5-inch radius wheel in the bottom. And the way this works is the true radius wheel pushes the metal up into the rubber, and it makes the metal take on the same curvature that the lower wheel has. So I'm just going to make a series of straight passes all the way from end to end with this, and you'll see what's going on pretty quickly. So without the rubber band, the shape that you get is some curvature right to left and some curvature front to back. What's different with the rubber band is that all of the curvature is right to left, and you get no curvature front to back. And that'll be beneficial for starting this shape. I don't like to go back and forth when I'm using the rubber band. It seems to work best if I roll right off the edges at both the start and the finish. So you can see this panel is picking up plenty of curvature already. And I'll just keep going until I reach the other side. So we're off to a good start. You can see I have lots of curvature in the panel, and this 5-inch radius wheel with the spring back will probably give me just about exactly a 6-inch radius curve. So I'm very happy with how that's shaping up. And let's try this against the buck. So far, so good. Now we'll start developing the curvature from top to bottom. Normally I do the most difficult area first, which would be this bulbous area near the center of the seat, but I'm going to do it differently because of the reverse curve on the top. Until I can get this corner to lay down flat against the buck, I won't really be able to test how the fit is near the center. So the way to start developing that shape is to stretch the metal on these edges. So this is the stretching machine, the opposite of the shrinker we used on the first panel, and I'm going to stretch the top of this first to pick up that reverse curve. So I've made a mark on here where the reverse curve starts, and it takes very, very gentle pressure to do this. I don't want to overstretch it, so we'll take it just a little bit at a time and test our progress frequently. So I have just the slightest curve in this now. Let's try it against the buck. So that's about 1/3 of the curvature I need. So I'll go back and make another pass. It needs very, very little pressure near the center here. Most of the action is near the end. We'll test that again. So that's at least half of what I need. We'll make one more pass with this. And you do have to be careful when stretching the edge of a piece of aluminum. Too much pressure can cause the material to tear. We'll test that again. That's nearly enough stretching. I'm going to give it just a little bit more in this area. That seems very, very close to what I need. So I'm going to stretch this edge just a little bit. Needs a bit of a reverse curve in that area too. I'm feeling how it's fitting the buck. The panel needs a little bit of a twist, which I can do with my hands. So that's fitting much, much better now. I'm feeling on the back of the buck to see how it's matching the contours. And it's coming along quite nicely. I'm going to do just a little bit more stretching right here. And we'll try it against the buck. And I think we're looking very good on this end. So now I no longer need the rubber band. I'll take the rubber band off and start using steel wheels, both top and bottom, to do the shaping and smoothing of this portion of the panel. So it's very convenient just to store your rubber band on the upper arm of the machine. And I forgot to put my gloves on, so I will get my gloves now. And using this same 5-inch radius lower wheel, I'm going to start smoothing the contour of the top portion of the panel. So I need to raise the lower wheel because there's no longer a thickness of rubber between the top and bottom wheel. It seems like a good pressure setting. That's shaping up nicely. Wheel this just a little bit more. So I'm pretty happy with how the top portion of this is fitting the buck. So now I can start working on the bottom portion. And just like we did on the other piece, I'm going to shrink the perimeter of this first. So I need to spin this machine around to get the shrinker facing me. So now I'll start shrinking around the edge of the panel. So far, so good. I really should have shrunk this edge first. When the panel has this much curvature, it's hard to get into the gap between the jaws. So I'm going to have to flatten this out a little bit just to get it in the jaws of the machine. Let's test our fit so far. It's coming along pretty well. I'll give it just a few shrinks on this edge. It's coming along nicely. So to smooth this area, I would prefer using a 5-inch radius wheel with a flat spot. So I'll take the true radius wheel out and replace it. And now I can start doming this area. So with a little more time on the English wheel, I've smoothed this part out nicely. I'm going to do one final check of the fit against the buck. You can see I've fastened the front piece into place so I can check the flow between the parts. It's looking like it fits very nicely. And I'll use our radius gauge to check the contour at each of the stations. And it looks like we're spot on. So these two parts are completed, and using the same processes, I have already shaped the pieces that fit on the other side of the buck. So I'm going to draw this video to a close, and next time we'll get into shaping the largest pieces that fit in the center of the buck. I love making these videos, and I'm honored that you're watching. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified about new videos. I read every comment, and I do my best to answer all questions. If you like what I'm doing, please click the Patreon link and become one of the great people who help me create new videos.